Do you often struggle to get your kids to practice, or do you wonder sometimes if you're getting what you need to get out of practice? Well, I'm here to help answer these questions and offer encouragement and help your practice sessions be more successful. I'm Rosalind Hayes from the Downingtown Music Academy. And let's get started first about some of the things that you need to think about when you're structuring a practice session at home for your children or for yourself. Sometimes we need it for ourselves too. The first thing that I'm going to say right off the bat, frequency is much more important than the length of time that you sit down to practice, and having a goal when you practice is much more important than just going in and setting the timer for an arbitrary amount of time and just practicing. You're not going to accomplish very much that way. That's the honest truth. You need to follow a strategy. At Downingtown Music Academy, I put down very clear strategies for my kids and for my adult students, and I can very quickly see if they have logged in and practiced. I can see through the app that we have, but I can also tell by listening to their songs whether or not they follow the structure that I set out. Because if they haven't, it's probably not going to sound any different than it did last week. Because we're really trying to zone in on what the problems are. And one of the things that we're looking at is accuracy versus fluency. So with accuracy versus fluency, when we want to be accurate with certain things that we keep making mistakes on, we don't want to just play through the whole song over and over again and just hope that those mistakes go away. I mean, maybe they will eventually, but what might be happening actually is that you're just rehearsing the same mistakes and actually making them stronger. So in this case, we really want to zone in on that measure, that little segment of music, and just work our way on it a few times. We want to break it down into manageable pieces. So if we're piano, like I said, it might be a measure or a phrase that we will repeat a few times, okay? And if we're still stumbling after 5 times or so, then we may need to make it even a smaller chunk. With voice, it's the same thing. I might say to a student, okay, I want you to listen to this phrase 3 times, and then sing with a singer 3 times, and then sing it on your own with a backing track 3 times. And I really want you to follow those instructions, because by breaking it down into manageable pieces rather than saying, oh, I'm just going to set the timer for 20 minutes and just sing the song over and over again, we're actually, making those connections in our brain through repetition of fixing some of these little inaccuracies and bringing them into our awareness. It's much easier for our brain to process. So that's the first thing I would say: break it into manageable pieces and follow your teacher's directions. We also want to be mindful that most of us process better through recognition rather than recall. So if you're working with a young child, you may try to ask them an open question like, what note is that? Well, they may have a really hard time answering that question because it's open-ended and there are 7 possible answers, actually more than 7 if you count sharps and flats. So you could say to them, is it E or is it G? Now they have a 50-50 shot of getting it right. So bring it down to binary questions. And don't be afraid as well to use certain visual cues to help your child or yourself out at home. Whether that's highlighting notes on your lyric sheet or words on your lyric sheet, which you need to sing in a slightly higher quality sound like head voice, or you need to breathe before a certain spot. Don't be afraid to put that visual cue in. But I also have things like this that I use for students who have a little trouble sometimes tracking through music, and we might put this is a sentence separator. We might put this on the music just to highlight that area. Or we might take a picture of a measure and blow it up, okay? So don't be afraid to isolate certain areas and to use visual cues to help yourself. Sometimes auditory cues can also help. So saying out loud to yourself, E, G, B, C, saying the letter names out loud, okay? Giving your brain extra input that reinforces what you're doing. That can be really helpful too. Let's say you have a wiggle worm at home, or maybe you're a wiggle worm yourself. don't be afraid, again, to break that practice session up into small, manageable chunks and interspace it, especially if you have to get a goal accomplished by a certain amount of time, like a song, by the end of the week, and you need to get the first page done for a performance. Don't be afraid to play a little bit, like maybe that time at this point the timer is effective as long as you keep those goals going, or you say, okay, I'm going to play this line 3 or 4 times, then take a break, go over, do some jumping jacks or whatever, or take a walk and come back. Just breaking it up a little bit, because studies show that when we're stressed or when we're frustrated, our brain can't process all that input at one time. So make sure that you're giving it breaks to keep the experience pleasurable, so that you can keep processing what you need to process and your brain doesn't kind of check out because it's frustrated or tired. Let's see, what else do we have here? Oh, if you're singing a song and you're really trying to nail down a specific breathing pattern, or you're trying to strengthen the sound, there are probably some syllables that your teacher has given you to work on these things. And these are the same syllables that you should be applying to your song, because they generally represent where your voice is lacking a little bit and where it needs to, as an overall thing, grow. So using those syllables and applying them to the music can really be helpful too. And then that way you're not just stuck improving on the warm-ups, but not really improving on the song. So don't be afraid to take some of those skills, or use that as a bridge to take some of those skills over into your music as well. And finally, my last comment that I will leave you with is reading for a lot of our instruments is just as important as physically playing it. So if you are in a situation, whether you're running around with back to school activities, or going down to the beach, or your piano room is being renovated, please don't think that's the only way you can practice. There are plenty of great links and apps out there to work on rehearsing your notes and reading. And I would be happy to direct you to some of those as well. The reading part of it is a huge part of practice, and so it doesn't have to sound like your child sitting down at the piano and playing. They need to be working on those reading skills as well to continue to improve. So if you're not able to be by your piano or your guitar or your ukulele for whatever reason, or even if you can't sing because of an illness, using some of these outside resources can be helpful, whether it's working on reading your notes through an app that tests you with flashcards, or whether it's listening to your song and imagining your muscles moving and working their way through singing the song. It's all good for your brain, and all that connection is going to benefit you when you go back to physically practicing on the instrument.